Well, hi, and welcome to Module 7. If you are one of the students who doesn't show up to class very often, then, or at all, then today is the day that you finally get a taste of what the lectures look like in the class. So let's take a look at it. First of all, this is the module that we're dealing with, Module 7, and attendance this week is automatic for everybody, because we had a lot of questions on this President's Day about whether or not there was class. And yes, there was class, because that's the way that the school set it up. There was no holiday set for today on the school, at the school on the website. What I normally do, by the way, just so you know, is if I want to check that, I just do a Google search, PCC academic calendar, and there it is. And you can see here that this is winter 2023, and on the 20th there's no day off. We did have a day off on the Monday the 16th, January 16th. So that's where I usually check this. Okay, we have our standard video presentation by Bob in here, and then the PowerPoint. And as you know, at least those who come to class know that I don't do I don't like PowerPoints, so I don't do those. I have a note in here that this will disappear this evening, that the quiz will be opened Tuesday late evening, because I wanted to go through the questions after I set up this lecture. So that's that. Okay, our lab instructions and lab submission is same as usual, using Extreme Labs, and of course our knowledge adaptation. The quiz, I have now been through the quiz, and I'm ready to open that right after I finish this video. So this will start, actually, what is today? 21st. So let's start this thing on the 21st. And what is it now? It's 6:50 p.m. So I'm going to say 8 p.m. We'll get this thing cranked up and ready to go. All right. Now, we don't have my notes here yet, so let's take a look at that. As a matter of fact, I should probably put them here. So let's just do that while you are here. I'm going to upload my file, and this one is on my desktop. It should be 287M Module 7. There we go. That looks a little bit better. All right, let's take a look at this. This is what I'm going to go through for the lecture. Now, excuse me, I thought that Bob did an excellent job this week in the video lecture that he gave. And so I am not going to repeat everything that Bob said, but as usual, what I would like to do is to clarify a few points, do some diagrams, in other words, everything other than the PowerPoint, because I'm not real fond typically of publishers' PowerPoints. And so I just like to clarify some of the relationships and some of the terms that are important here. And by the way, the reading this week was section 4.2 in the book. And unfortunately, I didn't feel that if you read 4.2 alone, that you really got a sense of this ESEAE thing. Really, that was more in 4.1. And so a lot of concepts that I'm going to talk about here are from 4.1, although we will extend them to 4.2. So first of all, let's just take a look at what this ESEAE thing is. What we're talking about, I'm sorry, I had to make a cut there. I had to sneeze, and I didn't think you would enjoy watching that. So ESEAE, it stands for Enhanced Security Administrative Environment. So as the book says, and I just quoted directly out of the book here, ESEAE is not a product, it's not a role, it's not a feature, it's a set of design principles that enables you to create a separate, single domain forest that is dedicated to Active Directory management. So here's what we mean by that, and this diagram I took right out of the book is a pretty good diagram. This administrative forest, the whole concept of this administrative forest is what ESEAE is all about. The idea being that if you're an administrator, I don't want you logging on to a domain controller. We're talking mainly about domain controller administration here. I don't want you logging on directly to one of these domain controllers in my production forest. Because if you can log on to it, the bad guy may also be able to log on to it. So I'm going to create a very secure environment over here by making a whole other forest. And I'm going to have a couple of, this shows 3 servers in it. Typically, or not typically, but minimum is you're going to have 2 servers in this thing. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But you're going to have an Active Directory server and then the PAM server, which we will discuss again in a little while. But that's the server that you're actually going to use, to log on, sort of log on to one of these servers in order to administer it. We're going to do JEA, the GIA that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to do JIT, just-in-time administration, also through this this server over here in the administrative forest. What we're actually going to do is your account is going to be on this computer over here, and it's not going to be on this computer. So when it's time to do some administration, this one, because of the software that we're going to install, is going to set up a temporary administrator account here, and it's only going to be active while you're administering it. So that means that the bad guy has no way to get on here to hack into this thing and do anything, because there's no administrative account on it. And that administrative account is a temporary account, and it's a virtual account. It's not even the same account. It's got the same SID, but it's really what we've got to call a shadow account. We'll see that in a little bit. All right, here are some best practices. These were not covered in the PowerPoints that Bob went through. These are in the book, however. The first thing is, you notice we have a one-way trust relationship here. I want this production force over here to trust the administrative force because we're going to administer from here. But I do not want the administrative forest to trust the production forest, because if it did, then I could reverse this. In other words, the hacker, the bad guy, could get on this thing and force information over here to the administrator. This guy here shouldn't ever be able to be changed, this administrative forest, except, of course, by a manager that's going to be the administrator of that. But other than that, it should never be alterable. And there are some very stringent things about it that we're going to look at some of those right now. So, as I said here, this way anyone on the production force cannot compromise the administrative force. This administrative force cannot be compromised because it doesn't trust any of these computers. So there's no way to get there. Now, how are we going to get onto these? That's coming. So hang on to your hat on that one. Production servers should have secure boot and TPM. So these guys over here should have secure boot so that the bootloader is protected. If it's been changed in any way, then you can't get on it. Right? That's what secure boot does. It checks the bootloader so that if, say, somebody puts a CD, DVD, USB flash drive, or something else in there to try to boot to it, to take control or to make alterations, it won't boot because the bootloader has to be unchanged in order for them to boot. That is secure boot. And by the way, TPM is one of the ways that it works, and so it stores the hashes and so on that are used. So we need these two things on there. And another, by the way, here, current systems should have TPM 2.0, not earlier than that. So all this really requires fairly recent technology. Selective administration is possible but not required. Now you're going, what in the world are you talking about, Roger? What is selective administration? That means that I can allow authentication only to specific servers. So in other words, if I've got 20 different servers on here, I've got print servers, file servers, Active Directory servers, and so on. I've got all these different servers over here. I can selectively choose what the administrator over here in the administrative forest is able to connect to. Multi-factor authentication should be required. I don't want the bad guy to be able to get on these things and either guess or find a password. I want two-factor authentication. Remember that multi-factor authentication means two factors at least. Well, it means more than one factor is what multi-factor authentication means. It could be 1, 2, or 3 factors. And here's your refresher on that. A one-factor authentication means just something that you know. In other words, a password, a PIN, a username, stuff that you know. That's one factor. A second factor is something that you have, for example. In other words, it may be a flash drive that I carry with me that I have to plug in. So it's something that you have. It could be a chip on a card. It could be my phone. So in other words, it sends me a code, and I've got, as many people do today, this is not that old, it's an old enough technology. A lot of people have it. For example, the Authenticator app. You probably can't see that. The Authenticator app right there that I could associate with this thing so that it sends me a code. So I have to physically have the phone with me to get on. The third one is something that you are, and that is biometrics. It could also be the way that I do something. That is usually considered something you are, although some books and authors might argue that that is a fourth and that there are a fifth, and so there are other factors that we could include. Some place you are by IP address, for example, something you do, some other characteristics such as the way you walk or the way you swipe a screen. But usually we put all those in something you are because it's similar to biometrics. So something you know, something you have, something you are. You have to use at least 2 of those to be multi-factor. Sometimes we call it 2-factor or 2FA, two-factor authentication. All right. Administrators cannot administer the administrative forest. I don't want an administrator to be able to make changes here and give himself better permissions than I have given him. So we don't want the administrator to be able to administer his own stuff. Otherwise, he has too high a power, and we don't want that. All computers in the administrative forest should use the clean source principle. I'm going to talk about the clean source principle in a separate section, so just sit on this one for a minute. Number dot. I didn't number them. All production forest computers through the administrative forest should have whitelisted applications only. Now, this is similar to clean source principle up here, but what we mean is, in this case, is that everything that runs on that computer, all production force computers. So we're talking these computers over here. Everything that runs on those should be whitelisted. In other words, first of all, I lock it down and I say nothing can run, and then I whitelist. Well, this can run, and this can run, and this can run. Those are the whitelists, so that nothing else on there can run. So applications, this is actually even true of other pieces like services, for example, should also be whitelisted. Administrative forest services should be monitored through some IPS IDS. In other words, there needs to be some auditing and monitoring going on in order to make sure that nothing changes. So there you go. These are some of the best practices of this setup that we have here. In order to do this, in order to do an ESEAE, by the way, we call this sometimes the Bastion host. A Bastion is something that's been hardened to withstand an attack. So it comes from a military term. So if I give you a target that's going to take all the attack, it protects what's behind the target that doesn't. A shield. You think of a shield as a bastion. Right? It takes the attack to protect the person behind it. Or I could, in computer terms, I could have a device on the edge of my network that is going to withstand the attack that's been hardened so that it can, in other words, the softer thing is behind it. The network is behind it. So this thing withstands the attack and not everything will go down. Just like my neighbor has several acres of trees. They were 100-year-old trees, and I had about 40 100-year-old trees on my property, and he cut his down. He harvested them, and right after he harvested them, we had a windstorm, and guess what happened? Every one of my trees fell down. And it was a mess. This was in 2014. We had a huge windstorm. We had 65-mile-an-hour winds. And because his bastion over there was gone, mine was vulnerable. So that's the idea of the bastion server. I miss those trees. All right. In order to do this, to create this bastion forest over here, or this administrative forest, I need to have certain things. I need a SQL server. I need a SharePoint server. I need an IIS server. And I need a DNS server. Now, that doesn't mean they have to be separate machines. As a matter of fact, here's what they usually look like. Here is the Bastion forest, or the administrative forest, we'll call it. And over here, this will, let's say that this is my domain controller, and by default, domain controllers have DNS on them. When you install Active Directory, it actually installs DNS along with it. That's one of those screens that comes up when you install it. It says, hey, by the way, we're going to install these other things. Is that okay? You could tell it no, and it would still do it, but it won't work, right? So it has to have this DNS there. And then in this same forest, and in fact in this same domain, because this is a one domain forest, this other server over here, we call a member server. By the way, it's a common term if you don't remember it. A member server is any server in your domain that is not a domain controller. So everything else are member servers. The file servers and storage and web servers, all those are member servers. They don't have Active Directory on them. So this one over here holds SQL, SharePoint, IIS. Why? Why do we need these things? You know, this is a Bastion server. That means it needs to be hardened and it should not have extraneous services on it. But we have to have the SQL server because it's got to hold these administrative accounts. We need SharePoint and IIS because, and this is going to be an important point, because we use a web interface in order to do the administration. It is a very safe and secure type of interface. We're using the web interface rather than directly giving commands. So That's why we need the SharePoint and the IIS server, because these are a web interface setup that we are required to use in order to get onto the production servers. Shadow accounts. So let's go back up here for a moment to this. When I first set these up, I'm going to put administrative accounts on them, but I'm going to remove them. I'm going to remove them and essentially copy them over to these servers over here, particularly the member server. And I'm going to do it in such a way that it creates what we call a shadow account. That shadow account has the same SID, the same security ID as the original one over here. Now that is not normal. That's very not normal. Anytime you create an account on a computer or even a domain, it cannot have the same SID as another account, and you cannot recreate the same SID. So what's this shadow account thing all about? Well, basically I am transferring that I'm moving, if you will, this account to this server without making any alterations to it. Now again, the software that we're going to use, and we're going to talk about that software in a little bit, but the software that we're going to use to do that is capable of making that transfer, even though it's not something we normally could do. So that is a shadow account. And as I said earlier, I'm going to use that shadow account to log on, but then it's going to create a temporary account over here, not the normal account that normally would live over there. So that's a shadow account. The concept of ESEAE also takes into, well, it also has a characteristic, I should say, of being tiered. So it's got 3 tiers in it. Let me try to describe the tiers, and hopefully this will make some sense. So the admins and the Active Directory computers on both sides, in both forests, have to be hardened and are in tier 0. The users, the administrators that do the administration, are also in tier 0. So what's the significance of that? The idea is that you cannot do anything outside of the tier that you're in. And we use tier 0 to interact with Active Directory. So, if I'm going to interact with Active Directory, I have to be a tier 0 administrator. The computers that I work on have to be in tier 0. The computers that I'm configuring have to be in tier 0. So we have, and in order to be tier 0, there are a number of, and I'm not going to go through them, but there are a number of security characteristics that it has to have. It has to be hardened to a tier 0 level in order to be called tier 0. So that we know that these are the most secure devices. But I can't do tier 1 stuff. Now tier 1 stuff holds the accounts, the groups, devices that are member servers, non-Active Directory servers. Now wait a minute, what if I'm an administrator? I mean, let's say this company may not have, 10 different administrators. It may only have 3 or 4 administrators. What if I need to do something with users? What if I need to set up a new user? Well, I can't do that from tier 0. I have to log off as my tier 0 account and log on to an administrative tier 1 account. So I have to have, as an administrator, I have to have different accounts for different kinds of things that I do, because I can't cross over. So tier 0 can't do user administration. It can do other kinds of Active Directory administration, but tier 1 is a user. So tier 2, are other devices. These are the workstations that are out on the floor. These are the printers and so on. So that's tier 2. So the idea is you have to log on as whatever tier you want to be in order to do something in that tier. Tiers are they are set up as OUs, organizational units, and so you'll have to kind of go back in your brain now and remember Active Directory terminology here. And I thought I was going to take a picture of this. Oh, I didn't put a picture of it on here. Okay, I should have. Let me see if I can. Let me look real quickly here and see if I can come up with a quick picture. Let's see. ESAE tier OUs of what it looks like and see if there is one out here. Here we go. I found one. All right. Let's call up that picture any day now. Any day now. All right. Where'd that picture go? There it is. There we go. So here you see these OUs. Tier 0 OU, Tier 1 OU, and Tier 2 OU. So the groups, the computers, the users all have to be in Tier 0, and they can't, and so they don't intermix with the groups, the users, the computers that are in Tier 1, and they don't intermix with the ones that are in Tier 2. So this is all set up through OUs in our Active Directory structure. That was not clear in the book, by the way, so I wanted to bring that one up. All right, so that is how these tiers are set up. Now let's talk about PAWS. These are what we call privileged access workstations. They may be inside of ESEAE, or they may be outside of it. In other words, you don't have to be running ESEAE in order to use privileged access workstations. But what these are special workstations that are going to sit somewhere outside of the server room, and they are going to administer the server. In other words, I'm going to log on. When I log on to these guys over here, in order to administer over here, I'm not walking into the server room to do it. I'm doing it from my desk on a PAW. And so these are privileged access workstations. That's all they do. By the way, one of the characteristics of these over here in the administrative forest and any Tier 0 is that they have no connections. They don't have internet. They don't have any kind of email. They probably don't even allow a flash drive to be plugged into them. That's been disabled. We don't want anything to be able to touch these things to interact with the outside world. We call that air-gapped, by the way. If we're not connected to the internet, that's an air gap, and so it helps protect our. If I'm running a let's say that I'm running a nuclear power plant, or I'm running an electrical plant, and I don't want hackers. I don't want somebody from Russia or China or whoever, North Korea, to be able to hack my infrastructure system, my power plant. I don't want that thing to be on the internet. Right? I don't want any internet connection. I don't want email connection. If you think about the Stuxnet virus, it's really more of a worm. The uranium enrichment plant was air-gapped. It had no connection to the internet, but they made a mistake. They made a big mistake because obviously the Stuxnet worm did get in. So how in the world did it get in? We think it got in through flash drives. We think that they actually went, whoever the perpetrators were, and we don't really know. We think it was the U.S. and Israel, but we believe that they actually went and put flash drives at a cafe or something close to the plant, and that, here's these engineers, and they came by, woo, look at this free flash drive. Let's see what's on it. And they plugged it into the computers that were air-gapped and not connected to the internet. They weren't air gapped well enough. These servers here, these administrative forest servers, no way. That, you know, I've heard of, I haven't seen this with my own eyes, of companies that actually filled their USB ports with JB Weld so that nobody could plug a flash drive into them. That's the level of course, you can just disable them in group policy so that they don't work. And you can also disable them in the settings in the UEFI or BIOS of the. This would be a UEFI machine. If it has secure boot, we know it's a UEFI. So we can also disable them. But this was a long time ago that I heard about that company doing that. So that's the whole idea here. We don't want them to be connected. Well, the PAWs have to be at the same level. These have to be tier 0 laptops or desktops that are also hardened to the same level as the administrative servers. So these guys don't have any other function. You're not going to use them to create a Word document or send an email. You're only going to use this particular computer to access the tier 0 servers in the administrative forest. Now, if you're not using ESEAE, if you're just, this actually happens all the time. As a matter of fact, I had a student once who was an administrator of a medium-sized company here in Oregon, and actually I'm in Washington. Why am I saying here in Oregon? And he told me he didn't have an ESEAE setup, but there was a server room and there was his desk outside of the server room, and he said, my security people will not let me walk in that server room. I am only allowed to access through this workstation at my desk, and it is only allowed, that's the only thing that it is allowed to do is to access the servers. So there's no physical access to the servers, and there's a hardened computer access to them. So in that case, he did not have an ESEAE environment, but he used the same principle. By the way, he also said that he was only allowed to access the servers through PowerShell. He was not allowed to use the GUI at all. So there you go. That's security. All right. So, and that, by the way, is becoming more and more standard today. The clean source principle, this I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about it a little bit more. So the clean source principle is a principle that we follow on tier 0 servers, probably even tier 1 servers, but it is the idea that all the software that we use, and by the way, this also includes hardware, applications, services, everything else, the source must be vetted so that we know where it came from. We know that it's genuine. It has been signed with a certificate and a signature. We have the hashes. We know that it didn't come from a unauthorized source. If it's a Microsoft piece of software, we know that it came from Microsoft because it came from a Microsoft website or directly from Microsoft. So that's the idea of clean source. All of the hardware must be clean sourced. The software must be clean sourced. Anything we put on that machine must be clean sourced. JIT is really kind of what we're talking about in chapter 4.2. It is not necessarily part of ESEAE. In other words, I can run JIT without it, but usually it is part of ESEAE. All right. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you, let's go down here. We're going to do all this through a piece of software called MIM, which is the Microsoft, let me see if I can come up with what this is. Microsoft Identity Manager. That's it. Microsoft Identity Manager. We're going to talk more about what it does in a little while. but it has a tool in it called PAM, or Privileged Access Management. PAM actually becomes a server. It is a PAM server. This guy back here is a PAM server. So PAM is a tool inside of MIM. And the PAM server then has the capabilities of running ESEAE Bastion, making the ESEAE Bastion host, of running JIT, just-in-time administration, and running GIA. So all three of these are functions of this PAM server. So this is the structure. I don't think that was very clear or clearly laid out in the textbook. So we'll get back to that in just a moment. So JIT is not necessarily part of ESEAE, but typically it is. In other words, it's possible to use the PAM server to set that up without setting up a Bastion host. So JIT is access focused on limiting the time that privileged users have access to resources, whereas JEA is focused on limiting the tasks that administrators can do on those servers. So they are complementary with each other. JEA is what can I do? JIT is when can I do it? So these are two separate functions that can both be set up within a PAM server. Let's talk about this MIM software for a moment. So Microsoft Identity Manager, see, why did I have trouble remembering earlier when it's written right there? Because I don't read my own writing, that's why. Microsoft Identity Manager is an application that provides a bunch of tools, technical talk there, a bunch of tools. Okay, I wrote it, for identity management. Well, that makes sense. Identity Manager does identity management. That shouldn't be hard to remember if you see it on a quiz. What does the Identity Manager do? Well, identity management. It does identity synchronization, but you don't have to learn these, by the way. They're not in the quiz for the most part. The reason I said for the most part is because PAM is. But so this is just to give you some perspective, so that you have a big picture. You have some hooks in your mind to put the clothing on, right? We need to develop this. We have to know what the closet looks like to know where to put the coat. Okay, so that's what I'm doing here. Identity synchronization. This tool allows you to synchronize identities between different systems, such as Active Directory, LDAP, SQL databases. Self-service password reset. If I want, and you've seen these, right? I forgot my password, and it does a self-service, does an email thing and all that. Okay, that stuff is built into the MIM software as well. The capability to do it. Certificate management, group management, identity management, and now the big one, number 6 down here, privileged access management. The tool that allows you to manage user access to applications and resources based on policies and rules. And JIT and JEA are, and even ESEAE are, what would that be called? ESEAE, I don't know. Esau, like in Esau and Jacob? I don't know. Anyway, so that's what this does. It's the privileged access management tool, which becomes, when we begin to do it, a privileged access management server that then can do these things. So I hope that organizes it a little bit in your brain. Role-based access control. Here's the thing. Microsoft Windows is not a role-based authentication server or a system. It's discretionary. DAC, discretionary access control. Well, actually, a little bit better control than discretionary access control is role-based access control. RBAC, we call it. There's actually a role-based and a rule-based, and they both are back. And then the other one is MAC, or mandatory access control. That's the military system. That's you have documents that are not controlled at all, and you got secret documents and top secret documents, and then you have people with secret tags and top secret tags, and so you have to match, right, the level of the document in order to access that document. That's mandatory access control. But so those are the basic ones. There's DAC, RBAC, role-based and rule-based, and then MAC. Those are the four most common ones. Well, it's not built into Windows. Windows uses DAC, which means the owner of the document, who happens to be, by the way, the creator of the document, or the folder, the object, is the one that has total control over who can access it. And as a matter of fact, I can set up a document, and I can say administrators cannot access this document. Do you know you can do that? Yeah, you can. Now, they can take ownership of it, and then they have ownership, so that you're not locking them out entirely. But you get this question all the time. People, if you read the forums, you'll see people say, well, how come I can't delete this file? I'm an administrator, or I'm on as the administrator. Why can't I delete this file or change this file or write to this folder? Well, because the system is the owner of that folder, not the administrator. You can take ownership and then do it, but you can't do it automatically. Well, that's DAC. That's discretionary access control. So you have to have this extra software in order to change it to a role-based access control system. All right, and then our reporting and analytics. So those are some of the important things in MEM. I know I got off track a little bit there because I just thought it would be fun to review this. I didn't plan to do that. All right, that's it. That's all of it. That's all, folks. I'm sorry I can't do the Porky Pig thing, but that's all I got. So I hope that this has been helpful, and if you're one of those people who doesn't ever show up to class, I hope that you understand why we do this in class, that we're trying to kind of deconstruct the logic, or I should say the picture of how everything fits together. So, because those are things that the book and the PowerPoints don't do very well, in my opinion. So that's what we do. So there you go, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture. We'll see you next week in class, and if you're not in class, I guess we won't see you next week. All right, thanks. Bye.